good morning. It's a beautiful Sunday. There's a Catholic Mass happening somewhere near this. So if you hear any ambient sounds, that is what's going on. And I'm starting another energy school group process tomorrow. And before I embark into the depths of process with a whole bunch of new and old faces and wanting a sense of completion and coherence. I feel like maybe I'd like to bring up maybe one or two things that would more or less create a bridge that spans the different points that were taken up in the last videos. So this is going to be video number 8. Sign for Infinity and the Octavian beginning for the new cycle. So I would like to bring up the science, the spirit of networks, most especially the semantic network, something that I've been bringing up. But what does it actually mean? There are key concepts that are essential within energy school to really hold what exactly is happening in inner dance. So as you might be realizing, if there were expectations here that I would tell people what to do in terms of facilitating inner dance, I find that that is not as productive or useful in the medium or long term. Rather than simply sharing with people exactly what is happening in the inner dance journey, I observe that people actually sustain their own conversation with the inner dance process in more fruitful and sustainable ways. So, thank you for staying with me this far. I know that maybe sometimes some of these seem like it's going a little bit too deep or a little bit too particular in one way or another, and I guess that's the whole point. That's my point anyway, because I really have been looking for these opportunities to take time in what seems sometimes to be just so much. And even I am having to acknowledge just the amount of energy and work I have to put into creating this video series. The goal is actually to write my third book and to make this as coherent as possible in the written word, but for one reason or another, this is the way to go. Okay, so I'd like to speak about the semantic network. Let me bring up this image. So everything that you've ever heard, everything you've ever read, everything you've ever learned, anything we might have ever inputted is networked inside of us. So we have something like the World Wide Web, but maybe even more complex, resting inside multiple systems within us. And there are different kinds of networks. So when I speak about the semantic network, it's the way words, conceptual signs hold meaning in what we call the mind. That this is the mind. It's a network of conditionings, of ideas, of concepts, of experiences in an aggregate form. So that is language. Semantic networks, in many ways, is language itself, because of the way language is the network, an aggregate of meaning held together by words. And so that is a semantic network, more or less. Oops, so going back to this. So very quickly, aside from the semantic network, there are other networks in and out there. The auric network is the network of all the sounds, noises. So this isn't a question mark as much as maybe an ear. But I like it that it does look like a question mark, which has its own reasons. So the auric network is the network of sounds um, in and outside my life world. And the iconic network is the network of images, of lines, of geometries in your visual network. So that's the iconic network. So simply put, when you go into inner dance, you actually invite, you seduce people into the network. We are not really going into the network in a sense because we are inside the network always. The other way of seeing it is that we are the network. This is who we are. So were we to bring up the Vesica Pisces, there is an awareness of ourselves more as the network than the individuated self, the egoic or id self. We become the super conscious or the subconscious or the unconscious, which is the energy field, so to speak. So we become the energy field that contains the parts of us that are parts or particulars as opposed to the part that contains us. Maybe in East and West relations, if this is more Western as a dominant basis of awareness, meaning that a lot of the workshops that I have with people from the West, a lot of the energy is focused and dominant in the upper chakras. Like a lot of visioning takes place. So I would say the ear might be here, and the eye might be there, while the ear, which is more vibratory, is focused on the lower parts. We are going to bring up high and low context to understand semantic networks and what latent inhibition has to do with that. So in one of the past videos, we were basically creating a comparative analysis between shy people who are highly sensitive to energy, whether it be the energy of words or light or sound, as opposed to people who are more low context with less sensitivity. These are the people who are able to engage the world a lot more directly. So these people are more literal in many ways. And shame-based people are more dominant in a vibratory sense, like in the ear. They're more we might sense that shame-based cultures are more synonymous with introverted versus extroverted personality types. And we see this in cognitive developmental theories that there seems to be babies really who are born much more high context. When we bring up the brain, these are the people whose amygdala is more easily triggered, whereas high context, whereas for low context people, their focus is very much placed in the cerebellum, the cerebral part, the cerebral mode thinking process, most especially the frontal lobe, so that there is maybe a balancing out, like in a lot of the sessions. The the common process for a lot of the people who are coming from Western fields, the pattern is normally to become more emotionally sensitive. Oops. More emotionally sensitized. So rather than simply seeing visions, there is an unraveling of what those visions mean from the greater capacity of the intuitive body's EQ, as opposed to the East. There is an arising of energy that brings about like a greater dominance in the higher chakra regions. Okay, so there's a balancing out. It then allows us to see that one isn't exactly better, one isn't exactly worse. That one is more literal, one is more figurative, one is more eye centric, and one is more like ear centric. That the highest chakra would still be the space in the middle. The space in the middle. Okay, so that in inner dance, there is something common though that happens. So were we to look at the REM state, that section of the circadian rhythms that allows us to go into a vibratory mode where the body is in delta or theta, and the mind and the visioning parts of the mind are oscillating in beta or gamma frequencies. What then is happening as people shift from being just maybe one particular point here, that this is me or this is me, and now there's this awareness that I am these, and there are all of these multiple possibilities, all of these possible connections. What is the point, and what is exactly happening when we go into the greater expression and experience of the energy field that is what we are? Let's look at these two modes of thinking as just another way of looking at the left and right hemispheres. So lateral thinking and parallel thinking are both seen as essential qualities of creativity. Let's start with lateral thinking. Lateral thinking is your ability to explore multiple possibilities, multiple approaches, instead of sensing just a single approach. So that maybe if I just point out these many different points, rather than being stuck with just one point, like we see that there are many particles. In inner dance, we sense that it's not just shifting into a space where there seems to be a greater access to multiple points, but that there are also possible connections between one point and another, and that maybe a certain image or a certain perspective, a certain awareness comes into play. Sometimes we call this insight, the ability to make connections where otherwise connections were not felt. And in regards to what we know about the semantic network and how that is connected to low and high latent inhibition, high latent inhibition basically models that people who come from more or less low context cultures, the way they experience time is not the same as the way high context people experience time. Low context people experience time through monochronic versus polychronic time. So monochronic time is pretty much a personality tendency to only be able to manage work, only be able to manage uh, engagements or interactions with the world, one activity or one moment at a time, as opposed to people who are more in polychronic cultures. Uh, and it seems like almost everyone is polychronic now. It basically speaks about how we are now doing so many things all at the same time, and we're okay with that. This is actually what inner dance does. So people who are more monochronic, when they go into their latent, that when they go into their semantic network, the way they access information is very sequential. It is very ordered. It is very point by point, not simultaneously, but in steps, in some sort of ordered um, logic. Were we to go back to Ned Herman's model, um, there's a greater sense of that, um, both here and here, where there's a tendency to try to organize, try to keep things in order, try to keep things sequential. So in fact, we see that word right here, the sequential brain. Um, for people who are experiencing inner dance, the awareness is not that. So instead of simply going into the semantic network sequentially, which is what's called direct priming, okay? That's how you prime information in high latent inhibition. Instead, people experience the journey into the semantic network through a more hyper-priming mode of thinking, which is non-sequential, non-linear, and more simultaneous, so that a single point is sensed in multiplicity, yet at the same time that there are interconnections with all the other points. Were you to choose one point, that each point seems to be nonetheless interconnected with all the other points anyhow. So to look at, not this one, but this one, in the first videos you're making very relevant correlations between the dream state, the near-death experience, the life review, the spiritual awakening, the Kundalini process, the and especially the wakeful REM. That this is the goal. So we to look at this model again. Maybe in upper left A, lower left B, lower right C quadrants, there's still an awareness of the semantic network in the ways that we try to process that through the world of logic or organization, or through the dialectical, the dialogic, as opposed to how we are then successfully able to hold the semantic network as wholeness, as integration, as synthesis in upper right D quadrant. That there are stages to that, and I think it was good that I was able to bring up the fact that many people who experience low latent inhibition in the past were diagnosed as having psychotic tendencies. That modern research is saying that madness and creativity are definitely interlinked in one way or another. And so maybe the more we understand low latent inhibition, especially in a way that the ventral tegmental area begins to send uh, dopamine into the striatum, what would um, what would we gain? Like, what are the benefits to move from the non-shared parts of the vesica piscis into the conventional, into the universal aspects of us? That is not you, me, or you and me, and thus me and you and everything else. Um, what is parallel thinking? It's basically the type of cognition, whereas the different points, the different angles, the different sides start to come into a symmetry where directionality is concerned. So rather than scattering the many different points, parallel thinking more or less speaks about directionality, which we can sometimes look at as intentionality, um, a phenomenological key concept of Ferdinand de Saussure and people like Heidegger, who understand that consciousness seems to certainly have a mind of its own, but this mind is the greater life world mind that is not just coming from inside of us, but is influenced by the intersubjectivity that we are born into every day that we wake up. So parallel thinking is the aspect of creativity where multiple points now seem to have a symmetrical quality about it. It was Einstein who said that imagination is more important than knowledge, and imagination and creativity then maybe looks at both the balancing of lateral and parallel thinking. That it's not really just about feeling out the different possibilities, different opportunities, different potentialities as it comes up, but a sense of essence, like what does it mean? What is it for? What is the purpose? Who am I? So what we're really just doing here is creating these mind models that allow us to be more comfortable with what seems to have no point when we go into the deeper reaches, which, yeah, maybe the point seems like it feels more blissful. I feel a lot of energy. I'm an awakening human being. But in one way or another, it is eventual that when people go into the deeper reaches of awareness, some kind of life world map is bound to arise that is unique for each and every one of us. That you will have your own ways of relating your subjective elements with your own objective parts. And that inner dance may or may not be a part of that conversation that you are exactly having. So to end this video, I would like to share one particular audio sharing that I had with one of my good friends. His name is Tom, and I feel that his explorations into the work of Robert Letham is very valuable to understanding exactly how inner dance really works. I really appreciate Tom, and in this video he's going to be pointing out in the latter part of his sharing how there are some individuals who are conquering the fear avoidance cycle by finding either direct or indirect ways of coming into a greater observation of the who am I, like where am I, why am I, that brings about a greater amount of healing, transformation, recovery, that doesn't so much look at our addictions, but are positing very relevant I feel like very essential points on how inner dance could very well deepen. So as we start to understand exactly how does this work, because I do live in it, like it is there. I'm a spiritual person, but I am also triggered, and I am also interdimensional. I'm contextual. That my cognitive map depends on what is feedbacked to me, that I'm needing to own, that takes place in any single moment, at any single day, any single week. Something is bound to speak back to me that I sent forth last year, yesterday, or a decade ago, that I deserve and need to understand, because it is mine. So um, I'm hoping that you appreciate this particular sharing, as it um, has helped me to understand the wisdom of the baby that we all share and are somehow going back to. Thank you for being here, and until next, I will see you again.
I was taken back to, like, I think my earliest ever memory is this formation in my room. I was very young. I remember it's really strange, like waking up from a dream in the morning time. So on stage, as all these soldiers walk into there's like an empty theatre, all these soldiers walk into the room, and it's like just like a marching, shouting, like very like chanting kind of thing, and I'm at the front of the stage, and right there, and they all just start kind of marching towards the very, very, and there's this just panic, like feeling of terror, and then I start to wake up, and then looking at my curtains, and the soldiers and the chairs and the rows become the patterns on the curtains, and then I'm fully awake, and I'm in my room and looking at the curtains. Like, this is when I was a kid. I don't remember how old, maybe less than a year or 2 years or something, and there they all are, and I was looking at these patterns on the curtains, and then we had to change the curtains. It's too much. But yeah, it went there, and then it went to this place of like ancient China or central London, modern central London. It's the same. There's not any difference between it. Whether you're Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, or a hipster in Shoreditch, it's like
At the same time, it's like a split.
Well, it was like there's these two scenarios playing out, but it's basically like they just hit together. These are just symbols and images and pictures, like somewhere in East London, somewhere in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon times. And it's just like these two things just come together, and it's like tumbling around together as this ball. There's a real reluctance to know something, and a real reluctance to avoid pain. And then it took me to this practice that I'd been kind of doing on my own for some time now, where it's the opposite of pain avoidance. It's like it's direct conscious pain seeking. So I'll have a tiny bit to smoke, start tapping, and go to YouTube and find distressing videos to look at, and just observe the emotion in the body as it manifests while tapping, and just explore the experience of it. And the last one I did was a few weeks ago. It was like just watching poverty, like African poverty, and just processing this emotion, and seeing these images of these starving kids like dying, and then coming to this thing of like, well, there's awareness in that formation knows what it's doing. It doesn't look like it when we get all like tight about it, but awareness in that formation with these skinny kids dying in deserts is like, there's something in it. There's something there. It's not an accident. It's not like it's their fault. And I don't know. There's a temptation always to get into a blame game and then an outrage of like, what are you saying? But it was just like, well, there's a total awareness that is part of it was just like context. It's part of a bigger context, and here is all this pain and suffering, and here is everything else all together, all and just as part of a giant context. And it looks horrible to look at, but awareness as that, in that system, when this starvation is going on, this hunger, and it's different. It's different when you're in it. It's different when you're actually there. And there's nothing that it delivers that can't be handled on a larger contextual scale. It's like the universe can handle death, pain, hunger, terror, all of these things. It's not this little pale blue dot somewhere in the cosmos.
Yeah, it's like a life is a dot.
Yeah, it's just a point. It's just a point and then a series of points connected by time. And it was kind of like there was more peace and a different door opening towards the idea of going back to Europe to do something. It was like I was shown well, actually no, because all this Asia stuff that you really like and are really attached to, that's great and that's fine, and I'd always assumed that going back to Europe would be like terrible. But this time it was like, well, actually there's this option here. In Europe there's a different way to do things than before, and that was kind of comforting and annoying at the same time. Yeah, there was some dialogue, and we all ended up in the same position. We all ended up in little fetus positions at the end. I was the first one to kind of come round, and I see everybody's just like this. And the end was like being a baby. The end bit was just like being a baby. So I guess I grew up pretty quick in the last few minutes.